everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for choosing to spend this gorgeous afternoon indoors with us, with art, with poetry. I know that it takes a special kind of devotion to walk through or past, a sunny courtyard and into this lecture hall. But don't worry, what we are about to experience is equally bright and colorful, just with fewer UV rays. We are gathered here for painted poetry, art of the Rajput Courts, a show that brings together painting traditions from several northern India courts dating from the 16th to 19th century. Some are bold and angular, and others soft and lyrical. Some are devotional, others poetic, and even musical in feeling. If you've already walked through the show at the Gallery 212, you've seen how it all comes together. The writing is beautiful, clear, and accessible, and the layout really lets each painting breathe. It is a show that does not overwhelm, it invites. And the person behind all this is our speaker today, Cristin, McKnight, Sethi. Cristin is a curator, educator, and a scholar who specializes in the art and the material culture of South and Southeast Asia. She's worked in museums across country, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and has taught at colleges like George Washington University and Minneapolis College of Art and Design. She currently serves as Director of Education at the Textile Center in Minneapolis and is affiliate faculty in art history at the University of Minnesota. Her research often explores the intersection of making, meaning, and memory, particularly in the context of textile, gender, and local crafts traditions. We're so lucky to have her here today to share more about this exhibition and the word behind the pictures. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Yang Liu. I'm chair of Asian Art Department of this museum and also curator of Chinese art. Please join me in welcoming Cristin, Sethi.
Thank you so much, Yang. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to have had the last several months to look closely at these paintings. So I very much appreciate the opportunity. And today I thought we would look closely at a few of the paintings that are in the exhibition, and then if people are interested, we could even have our Q&A in the gallery if you haven't seen the exhibition, or we can look at things together. In 1591, the poet Keshav Das completed a text known as Rasika Priya, describing romantic themes related to Lord Krishna and his goddess consort Radha. Written in the vernacular language of Braj Bhasha, with over 400 verses divided into 16 different chapters, the Rasika Priya presents Krishna and Radha as idealized lovers, the Nayaka, or hero, and Naika, or heroine, who epitomize the intertwining themes of romance and devotion, or love and devotion. In this text, the goddess and god are familiar and accessible, not imposing stone icons found in a temple, but rather divine forms marked by their humanity. A comparable approach to interpreting Krishna and Radha appears in this painting, originally from the Pahari Court of Nurpur, which is currently on view in MIA's South Asia Gallery 211. So not in the painted poetry exhibition, but right next door. Here we see the divine lovers embracing as they seek shelter from torrential rain clouds under a lush mango tree and leafy parasol. Krishna, depicted with his characteristic dark skin, yellow hip wrapper, and golden peacock crown, gazes lovingly at Radha. The god and goddess do not face the viewer with wide open eyes to allow us to take darshan or divine sight from them, as we might during a puja or religious ceremony. Instead, Krishna and Radha's love affair seems to be a corporeal one, grounded in gestures familiar to worldly passion and sexual tension. Their bodies touch and arms intertwine. Radha rests her hand on Krishna's shoulder. Krishna gently traces Radha's jaw with his finger as if they were about to kiss. In an almost childlike maneuver, Radha steps on Krishna's feet, tickling his golden anklet with her toes. In this painting, Krishna and Radha are wholly consumed with one another. The attendants standing nearby, even the impending storm, are secondary to the lovers and their passion. However, despite these clear representations of human love and romance, we also know that the relationship between Krishna and Radha is a symbolic one, rooted in deep spiritual devotion or bhakti, particularly for Vaishnavites or Hindu followers of the god Vishnu, of which Krishna is one avatar or manifestation. In this context, all devotees or bhaktas of Krishna become like Radha. Their adoration of the god is all-consuming and unwavering. The exchange of glances in this painting between Krishna and Radha, looking deep into one another's eyes, mirrors the experience of darshan between devotees and the divine. These two aspects of Krishna and Radha's relationship, the intertwining themes of corporeal love and spiritual devotion, epitomize the Shringar Ras, an emotional experience rooted in expressions of romance, beauty, eroticism, and passion. The concept of rasa, or the emotional response evoked by a work of art, is a guiding theme throughout the exhibition Painted Poetry, Art of the Rajput Courts. The word ras, which we can translate from Sanskrit as sap, flavor, juice, or essence, refers to the pleasure that a knowledgeable viewer, known as a rasika, feels when looking at a painting. Rasa theory was first applied to the performing arts and continues to be used to describe an audience's pleasure or experience of music, poetry, and theater, in addition to the visual arts. Through the concept of rasa, we can explore how artists created paintings to evoke a specific mood and to elicit an emotional response in the viewer. And not just any viewer. In order for the experience of rasa to take hold, the viewer, or rasika, must be well-versed and insightful, a true connoisseur of the arts. The experience of rasa requires both a skillful artist to convey the mood of a painting and an insightful rasika to taste it. To create this immersive experience, artists reveled in the visual details of their painted worlds and tried to create images that captured all of our senses, not only engaging the aesthetics of sight, but also evoking pleasurable smells, sounds, tastes, and touches. Painted Poetry offers an introduction to the concept of rasa by presenting a selection of paintings produced under the Rajputs, which were independent Hindu warrior kingdoms that ruled throughout northern India from the 7th to the 20th centuries. Created for the viewing enjoyment of elite Rajputs, these works of art offer insight into the multisensory worlds of pleasure that these warrior kings inhabited. By looking closely at the visual details of the paintings in the exhibition, we can become like rasikas, or connoisseurs of the arts, even if only momentarily, to experience the pleasure and emotions evoked by these images. In the 27 paintings in the exhibition were created between the 16th and 19th centuries and showcase the stylistic diversity of Rajput paintings coming from the 3 prominent regions under Rajput control. There are paintings from Malwa that utilize bold colors and angular forms, as well as images from the various courts in Rajputana that explore poetic references and emotional themes, as well as lyrical compositions from the Pahari courts that depict expansive landscapes and exquisite detail. It is also worth noting, and I will say that this map is conveniently also in the gallery. It is also worth noting that during this period, the Mughal Empire was expanding its control and eventually ruled over the Rajput courts with differing relationships between individual Rajput Maharajas or kings and the Mughal Emperor. According, some Rajput paintings have close stylistic relationship to images produced in Mughal painting ateliers. And so while this exhibition focuses on Rajput paintings from Mia's collection, the relationship between Rajput rulers and the Mughals is always in the background. Considering the paintings in the exhibition alongside the concept of rasa helps us to visualize the rich literary and cultural domains of the Rajputs and to revel in the arts of music, dance, painting, and poetry that shaped their lives. So we're going to look at a few of them together now. One of the earliest paintings in the exhibition is a page from the first illustrated series of the Bhagavata Purana, a Sanskrit text originally composed between the 9th and 11th centuries that chronicles the life of Lord Krishna and promotes bhakti, or devotion, for him. This painting dates to the first half of the 16th century and depicts female gopis, or milkmaids, dancing through the forest at night, mesmerized by the sound of Krishna's flute. The horizontal composition recalls earlier palm leaf manuscripts, and the sharp angular skirts of the gopis and their large frontal-facing eyes align with Chorpanchasika, or early Rajput painting styles. Book 10, chapter 21 of the Bhagavata Purana, which is titled The Song of the Gopis, describes the gopis' adoration for Lord Krishna and the forests of Braj, where Krishna and the gopis live. And this is a wild, beautiful, verdant space full of trees and fragrant flowers. The text reads, "When the cattle were grazing, Krishna walked through the deep forests, alongside the lakes and rivers, and through the mountains which resonated with the sound of birds and the humming of bees. Through glades of trees adorned with their floral wealth, Krishna played charmingly on his flute. When the gopis of Braj heard from a distance the enchanting music of the flute, it excited their erotic sentiments, and they sang to each other about Krishna in his absence. He is possessed of a charming personality, like an accomplished actor, graced with a crown of peacock feathers, his ears decorated by karnikara flowers, clad in garments of brilliant yellow like molten gold, wearing a garland made of flowers of 5 different colors, filling the holes of his flute with the nectar of his lips. With his music, he brings delight to all creatures of the world." The text continues to describe how just by listening to the music of Krishna's flute, the gopis become bewitched and their hearts are transported. As they sing Krishna's praises, each of them imagines that she is embracing him. In this painting, the gopis similarly appear bewitched, moving rhythmically through trees and flower shrubs, raising their hands and bending their elbows as if they are dancing to the music of Krishna's flute. They are dressed beautifully in colorful patterned skirts and diaphanous shawls, with flowers, perhaps fragrant jasmine, braided through their hair. They wear earrings, bracelets, bells, necklaces that jingle as they move, dancing, running toward Krishna. They embody Sringara Rasa, beautifully adorned, idealized female figures who are passionate in their love and adoration of the god. Another painting in the exhibition, an 18th century image from the Rajput court of Kishangarh, similarly illustrates the Sringara Rasa, that is, evoking feelings of romance, beauty, eroticism, and passion, as it is intertwined through both human love and spiritual devotion. In the 3rd chapter of the Rasika Priya, the poet Keshav Das writes from the perspective of one of Radha's female companions or attendants, who describes to Radha the different ways that she should adorn her body in preparation to meet Krishna. She says, "O Radha, first you must bathe yourself, wear clean clothes, paint your feet with mahavar, arrange your tresses, apply fragrant paste to the body, wear a variety of ornaments, chew fragrant spices, apply kohl to the eyes, speak delicately and smile softly, cast your sweet and clever glance all around, be faithful to your husband. These are your 16 adornments with which you should seek pleasure." It's a lot to think about. In this painting, we see three women standing on a terrace, one of whom appears to be getting dressed, adorning herself in the same way as Radha is described in the Rasa Priya. Our eyes are immediately drawn to the central figure, a female Nayika, who stands on a small bejeweled footstool and whose head is framed by a green and gold halo, marking her not only as an important figure in this composition, but also as divine-like, much like Radha herself. The Nayika combs her hair with her hands, which we can see are colored with Mahavar, a red lac-based dye used much like mehendi or henna to adorn the hands and feet. Her large, stylized eyes, typical of paintings from Kishangarh and following the characteristic style of the artist Nihal Chand, are accentuated by a thick application of black kohl. Two attendants standing nearby hold a mirror and offer a tray of vessels, perhaps holding fragrant pastes that she can use to further adorn her body. And yet, the Nayika does not appear to gaze at her own reflection, but instead glances down, perhaps lost in a daydream thinking of her lover, maybe Krishna, or admiring the Saras cranes, themselves symbols of marital fidelity, unconditional love, devotion, and good fortune, who dance around her feet. Not only is the artist of this painting creating imagery intended to evoke the Sringara rasa, to incite thoughts of love, romance, and devotion, but they are also giving us a small window into Rajput court life. We get a sense of Kishangarhi architecture. Terraces framed by ornate pierced marble railings, baluster columns carved with lotus petal motifs, and scalloped arches topped with colorful fabric curtains and ornate roof eaves. We also understand something of the flora and fauna. The Saras cranes, the verdant palms and manicured trees, as well as the smooth green hillside that slopes down to a silvery body of water. In this way, the artist evokes Sringara rasa and makes reference to a multi-sensory world of experience. The sound of birds, running water, rustling leaves, the cool touch of marble and soft fabric, the sights, sounds, and feelings of this pleasure-filled space. An exquisite painting from Kangra not only epitomizes the Sringara rasa, but also makes reference to an evocative, sensual world that is the hallmark of Rajput painting. At center are a pair of lovers richly adorned in clothing accented with metallic gold thread and jewelry studded with emeralds, rubies, and pearls. The couple embraces, their limbs overlapping and entwined as they stare into the distance, and the Nayika points his left hand toward a dramatic impending storm. Serpentine flashes of lightning seem to startle a flock of cranes whose white bodies stand in contrast to the billow of black and gray clouds. The couple is not alone in being mesmerized by the storm. A peacock, perched on the roof eave, tilts its head toward the sky, its beak mirroring the Nayika's raised hand. Just behind the couple are a handful of female attendants, carrying accoutrements to keep the lovers comfortable. A punkah and a marchal of peacock feathers to fan them and keep mosquitoes away, a gilded hookah with a long curving pipe, which the Nayika holds in his right hand. His momentary pause from smoking seems to be further evidence of the storm's captivating draw. To accentuate the pleasure of this storm-watching party, a group of musicians appear in a lower terrace, playing instruments and lifting their heads in song, offering perhaps a melodic accompaniment to the claps of thunder. In the distance, cowherders corral their animals, perhaps moving them to safe shelter before the rains begin. We can find poetic reference to similar storm scenes in another text composed by Keshav Das, the Kavi Priya, in which he devotes one chapter to describing lovers during different seasons and months of the year. Known as Baramasa, or 12 months, this text uses the voice of a female protagonist who is describing various seasons to her lover, very often pleading with him to stay with her so as not to go traveling and leave her by herself. In the section on Shravan, a month during the rainy season, the poet writes, "During the month of Shravan, the rivers, being in spate due to rains, meet the sea, making a pleasant scene. The creepers, freshened by rains, have clung to the trees. The lightning meets the clouds and shines all around. The peacocks, listening to the thundering of lightning and knowing the rains are around, make happy sounds announcing the meeting of heaven and earth." Thus, all the lovers are meeting their beloveds. In Shravan, what to say of going out? One should not even listen to talk about going out. Stylistically, this painting moves the complex and diverse category of Rajput painting into new representational territory. Different from the early Rajput image of the Bhagavata Purana, of the gopis dancing through the forest to the sound of Krishna's flute. That was that image, if you remember, that's characterized by dramatic stylization, almost abstraction of the gopis' bodies and their faces. Here, the artist, who's working approximately 150 years later, is showing his considerable painting skills and facility in rendering figures and forms with intense clarity and precision. The details of the leaves, the ripe mangoes and bananas, the minuscule townscape in the distance are all features of Rajput painting from the Pahari region. That's the sort of hill region, the kind of foothills of the Himalayas. The variation of the bodies in this scene also suggests the influence of Mughal portraiture. One attendant turns toward another, and we see a musician's face in a partial three-quarter view, rather than strictly in profile, which was a strategy that was developed and flourished in Mughal painting ateliers. So I think you can see it, and sort of the female musician in the bottom area there with that three-quarter view. So I would like to conclude with one of several paintings in the exhibition which makes reference to musical modes or ragas, an improvisational melodic structure and system of composition rooted in Northern Indian classical music. These so-called Ragmala paintings work in tandem with the concept of rasa by expressing the mood evoked by a musical performance and the emotional response enjoyed by the audience. Ragmala paintings often use a female figure known as a ragini to embody the theme of the Ragmala. One such example is Bhairav Ragini, which we see here in a circa 1770 painting from the Rajput Court of Marwar. That's where currently where Jaipur is. Bhairav is an avatar of the Hindu god Shiva, and the eponymous Bhairav Rag is one of the oldest musical modes in classical music, thought by some to be the first sound that emerged from the sun god Surya's mouth. Bhairav represents Shiva's meditative ascetic nature and is a raga associated with the morning. It is peaceful and solemn. As a painting, Bhairav Ragini is intended to be the female companion to Bhairav Raga, embodying and amplifying the themes of the raga. The painting we see here depicts three female figures inside a small Shaivite temple. At center, one of the women holds a conch shell over a Shivalinga, the most potent and iconic form of the god. Milk cascades from a vessel suspended directly above the linga, falling first on the conch shell, a practice intended to purify and sanctify the space and to symbolically nourish the linga and cleanse the devotee's mind and soul. A garland of white flowers adorns the linga and mirrors the garland and jeweled ornaments worn by the female devotee. Directly behind her, another figure holds a platter, presumably filled with offerings for the god. Seated inside the temple is a female ascetic, her skin rubbed with ash and her hair matted, similar to Shiva's in his ascetic form. She appears to be in deep meditation. Her bowed head, knees, and elbow all point toward the linga. The painter of this image meticulously renders a scene of devotion amidst the luxurious material world of the Rajputs. The woman making offerings to the Shivalinga wear costumes typical of Rajput princesses and noblewomen. Colorful skirts, cropped blouses, and diaphanous shawls edged with metallic gold thread, and accentuated by earrings, nose rings, forehead ornaments, strands of pearl necklaces, stacks of bangles, armbands, and anklets. Their hands and feet are edged with mahavar, and their eyes are lined with kohl. The act of adornment or decoration, a practice known as Sringara, here refers not only to the offerings and adornment of the linga, but also to the women themselves. In South Asia, beautifying the body with ointments, jewelry, and fine clothing is not just for aesthetic pleasure, but also protects the body and makes it whole. These women are idealized Rajput beauties engaged in a peaceful moment of spiritual devotion and contemplation, a moment referenced in this early morning raga, a prayer and offering to the divine. So I wanted to close by playing that recent recording of the Bhairav Rag, which was playing when you entered into the auditorium, which serves, I think, as a companion, a useful companion to this painting, and helps us remember this multi-sensory world of the Rajput courts that we see evoked in these images. So hopefully this will work. But I just invite you to look at the details of this image while we hear the rag playing. I am happy to answer any questions here. We can also walk across the hall to look at the exhibition together. We can look at some more paintings together, and I'd be happy to answer questions there. But it's hard to see people because of the light in my face. But if anyone has any pressing questions now, or something that you wanted me to go back to in the images that I shared, we can do that. Or otherwise, we can go across. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask about the presence of the Nandi, the bull, in this particular piece?
Yeah, just in the sense, so who is Nandi? Maybe I'll start there for those who aren't familiar. So Nandi is the bull, who is Shiva's animal mount or Vahana. So often we see at a Shiva temple or a shrine, there'll be an image of a sculpted image of Nandi the bull. So it makes sense to me that we see Nandi here. What I love about this painting is this wonderful body of water that seems to take on its own life, sort of emerging from, I'm thinking sort of the basin underneath the Shiva and Yoni, and then we have this sort of very stylized what appears sort of gray, but I think probably initially was quite remarkably shiny and silver, sort of moving into maybe a tank of some kind or a body of water. Yeah. Did you have? Was there anything else about other than? But it's pretty typical that we would. He is a little bit small. I think there's. I actually really love the variety of perspectives that we get in this image and in several of the images that we'll see in the gallery. Certainly we have unusual scale happening in a lot of the paintings. Sometimes there's one painting in the exhibition from Sitama that we can look at where the prince is the biggest of all of the other male figures. He is the biggest, he's the most important, so it kind of makes sense that he would have that be much larger. But here I also love the sort of flattening of the space, the way that the artist is really showing us the entire Shivalinga and sort of moving that ground where the female figures are sitting, moving it forward, kind of the frontal plane. And then also the way that the tree seems to be both kind of inside the walls of this shrine, but then also outside the walls of this shrine. And then we see the trees, sort of other trees peeking through in the door on the right. So there's a lot of wonderful playing of perspective, and I think also scale here. Yes. Sorry, I have to do this so I can see people.
I'm curious about the age of the paintings, that the kingdoms, as you mentioned, went from, I believe, the 7th century onwards, but the paintings that we see all seem to be somewhat more recent, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, we don't have paintings really before, we don't have Rajput paintings before the 16th century. We have, so, the earliest paintings we have from India, and I can also defer to my colleague sitting right behind you, who is also a painting expert from South India. But some of the earliest paintings we have from the subcontinent are murals. And so we have palm leaf manuscripts in the Buddhist tradition, particularly from can I just say remind us later? I hope I didn't do that. So we have, from the Pala period, we have early Buddhist painted manuscripts on palm leaf, and then from roughly this part of India, the Jain manuscript paintings are probably the earlier ones. Those move on to paper, but retain that sort of horizontal format. And then maybe I'll just quickly go back to the first painting that I started with. This is the earliest painting in the show. And this is representative of some of the earliest Rajput paintings we have, to the point where we don't, they're generally classified or categorized as Chor Panchasika style paintings, not that they explicitly refer to that text or that story, but they all seem to be around that similar kind of style and from that period, but we can't link this to even a specific Rajput court as we get with some of the later paintings. But so I would say that there are, we have mural paintings from Rajput courts that may have earlier origins and were painted over time. But the manuscript painting tradition comes later. We don't have paper come to South Asia until, I think it's the 12th century is when we start to get painting. I'm sort of like looking at Anna, but also trying to block the sun or the light from my eyes. So we have, painting is introduced, particularly with the Sultanate rulers who come into India in the 12th century. And we have flourishing painting patronage under the Sultanate rulers, in not just in and around Delhi, but in the various Sultanate kingdoms. And then you've got the Mughals are really great patrons of painting and a really rich manuscript painting tradition. So that's really when you see kind of this explosion of manuscript painting I would say. But yeah, it's a great question. And there isn't, yeah, so no, thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. What were typically the substrate or materials that the artists used for their paintings?
You mean the pigments? And so it's mineral the paper?
Like the paper, the
Yeah,
substrate?
so it's usually, it's a wasli paper is a lot of what some of the papers are. We should look at some of them because, you know, you can see when you look, it's hard to tell here, but when you look at them in the gallery, you can see there's really kind of thickness to some of the papers, and almost like you can see the wasli paper is like a layered kind of paper that was predominantly used in the Mughal painting courts or ateliers. You can see kind of the thickness of some of these papers, and you can also see the layering of the pigments on top of these. But we have, not in this exhibition, but we know that in sort of the Rajput Courts, we also have painting on cloth that's being produced. So pigment painted, not mordant dyed or painted. We have both, but those are particularly in the court of Mewar. There's a strong tradition of painting on cloth from in and around the temple town of Nathdwara. So there are some of those as well. But these are all paper.
So even if you don't have a lot of examples of the earliest, can you assume that the motifs and was it kind of formulaic and kind of rigid about how?
Well, there's certainly a kind of a style for this sort of early Rajput painting or Chorpanchasika style. The figures, you know, the faces are always in a sort of a profile rendering, and the eye is very often a frontal facing eye. So we can sort of see that exactly here. All of these women are in profile, and yet we're not seeing a profile eye, we're seeing a frontal facing eye. So that's very typical of the early Rajput paintings. And then also the handling of and this is also something that we see very clearly in Jain manuscript painting that's a little bit earlier than this. Very similar handling of the faces and those eyes. And then the clothing, the gagaras, the skirts that the women are wearing, that kind of, do you see how, so I can just point. Dramatic that's coming out from the front of their skirt. That's also very typical of Chorpanchasika style painting. So these very stylized handling of fabric and the garments that the figures are wearing. And also I would say the patterning of the skirts, the rendering of those textiles, really, it's very closely related to the Jain manuscript paintings, some of the Kalpasutra paintings that exist, where pattern is really sort of flatly applied to the skirt, really bright reference, brightly colored and patterned textiles. Does that answer your question? And maybe just to follow up on because I did sort of contrast this image with the second to last image I showed, which was made 150 years later in a totally different, in a different part of this region. This is further north. This is a painting from Kangra, from the Pahari Hills. But here you can see there is a really different handling of the faces, of the bodies, of the clothing. There's much more attention to kind of representational style, rendering these figures as they might appear in real life, sort of. So, there is also, and why I kind of started at the beginning mentioning the influence of the Mughal painting traditions. There's a lot more attention, particularly in sort of later Mughal painting, to really try and focus on individual faces and sort of individual portraiture. And so there's more interest in representational depictions that we see coming out of Mughal painting traditions. And there seems to be a good deal of influence between some of those Pahari courts and what's happening in the Mughal painting ateliers, different from something like this.
Cristin, a two-pronged question. Do we know anything about the artists that were either appointed or worked in the court? And then two, the paintings themselves or the manuscripts, did they ever take on spiritual significance as an object beyond the painting? Or how do you approach that in this context?
Great questions. I'm going to write this down so I don't forget the two. So the first thing about artists, we do know about some artists, not all artists, but some artists, we have some information about artists who were working in specific courts. And this painting in particular is not, is sort of a copy produced about 100 years after, but very much in the style of an artist named Nihal Chand, who was kind of famous from the Kishangarh court. So we know the dates he was active, and we also kind of know his style of painting. So, you know, we have, and you'll see in the exhibition, there are some references to specific artists and their active dates are there. So we have some information. I would say that the most most comprehensive information we have about Indian painters Rajput painters comes from this region, the Pahari region, and a scholar by the name of B.N. Goswami did quite a lot of wonderful research identifying specific painters, painting families, exhaustive biographical information and research that he uncovered about those artists, and was really able to trace a lineage of painting in the Pahari region, which itself is kind of it's sort of diverse in terms of where the paintings are emerging. We don't necessarily, we know that the artists were kind of moving around from like working for one court and then another one. So when we see an attribution to a specific court in the Pahari region, it doesn't necessarily mean that the artist was just staying there and working, but it might be in the style of Kangra, or he was working there, but maybe elsewhere. But you know, I would say there's a lot of good information in that region. And then also in Mewar, there's been some great research done on some individual painters of Mewar. We don't know the names of all the artists in this exhibition. Again, a couple of them, but there is some. And even we do have some paintings from the Pahari region that will say kind of after, or you know, that one or two generations after Naintsuk and Manaku, who were painters, who were brothers. And so even that attempt to create a kind of artistic lineage there. And then the other question was about the spiritual power of the paintings themselves. So in Rajput paintings, these were paintings that were commissioned and enjoyed. They were not worshipped in a temple setting, but we have examples of other painting traditions, other manuscript or sort of single painting traditions in South Asia where that is the case, where an actual object takes on a more sacred kind of role, or sort of active in a kind of spiritual context. But a lot of these images that you'll see in the exhibition do depict, make reference to divine figures. So, but usually enjoyed not in not quite a secular setting, but in a court setting, I guess would be the right way to say it. All right.
I have one question.
Yes, please.
Were all the paintings small and like manuscript illustrations, or did they have like a big one that they put in the living room?
So they're all different sizes. We do have some paintings that were really big, not necessarily the ones in the exhibition, but there are Rajput paintings that can get quite large. Not all of these were manuscript paintings. They weren't necessarily attached to a text. So some of them they're standalone paintings. No, you would actually, I mean, so in terms of sort of historically, what I've read and my understanding is that paintings were held and they were sort of admired and looked at. You know, it's not a very good reproduction, but there's a painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art by the artist Nine Sokue reference that shows one of his patrons looking at a painting. And it's kind of a perfect illustration. It would have been too blurry to show you here, but it's, you know, the ruler is sitting on his throne and he's smoking a hookah and there are musicians and attendants sort of around him, and the artist has just presented him with a painting. And it's an image of I think of a goddess maybe. It's sort of it has a sort of divine theme to the painting. And the ruler is holding the painting with his hands and admiring it and looking at all of the details. And so that's how usually I would say the majority of these paintings, that's, as I understand it, that would be the way to look at them. Now I've seen them more recently hung on walls, and I know that, for example, in the Mughal courts, the paintings, now some of those were more connected to historical records of a ruler and would sometimes have text written on the back, and they would almost be like performed, not quite performed, but sort of held up and displayed, and then the text would be read for the viewer, and so it has a more performative quality to it. But these are not necessarily originally displayed in the way that they're in the gallery, though that makes it easy for us to see them. Yes.
One of the two attendants is holding the picture.
In this painting or in the? We've got a mirror here.
That's not a mirror, that's a painting. I looked at it, it doesn't.
I love this because, you know, Young and I had a sort of almost a disagreement about this when we looked at it the first time, because I said, I don't think that this is a mirror. I don't think it's being tilted towards this figure, Bani Tani. I think that the attendant is looking at herself. But I love that you think it's a painting. That's such a great idea. Yeah, a little bit different. I know there is some like ambiguity in some of these, which is really fun. It's right, and that's why it's, you know, she's looking down. She's caught in a daydream. She's doing something else. She's definitely not looking at. If that is a mirror, she's not looking at herself in the mirror. But I like this that it's a painting. Well, I think we should all look and go and see what we think.
Face?
Yes.
Because
Yeah. So, and I will say that the images that I've seen that are very clearly paintings being held, like this one from the Met that I referenced, you can see it's a full body of a goddess, I think. So it's not like a bust. But, you know, in Mughal portraiture, you have some busts or just sort of the head. But I interpret this as a mirror, but open to. Yes. Yes. It has and we're further suggesting it as a mirror. Is that what you're saying? Or as a mirror, though? Are you saying as a mirror or a painting? It definitely has a frame, absolutely. Oh. Well, we still have time. If we want to walk across the hall and look at things together, we can maybe take a tally, take a vote. Who's on mirror side, who's on painting side, and we can see what we think. Thank you all for your attention and for being here.